In continuations with your online class, today we will explain your theme 10, that is colonialism and the countryside. This chapter is divided into four major parts. First, we will be looking at the Bengal and the Zamindars in the colonial period, and then we will look at the competitions, the hoe and the plow, and what that means for this Indian economy and the people. Okay, and in the third sections, we will talk about the revolt in the countrysides, that is the Bombay Deccan, and finally we will do a quick discussions on these Deccan riots. Okay, and today we will be looking at this Bengal and Zamindars and the hoe and the plow. Okay, so let's look at the Bengal and the Zamindars. The chapters open with discussions on an auction in the districts of this Bardwan in the Bengal regions, where a numbers of mahal estate held by this Raja were being sold. And then the permanent settlement had come into power in 1793, and now the East India Company had fixed the revenue according to this permanent settlement. Okay, and so that each jamindar would have to pay this fixed revenue, and the state of those zamindars who fail to pay this revenue would be auctions to recover the revenue for this British company. Okay, now since the Raja of this Bardwan had acquired huge area, his stats were being put up for auctions, and many new purchasers came to the auctions, and the estate were sold to the highest bidder. And but the collectors of this revenue are of this Bardwan who had organized these auctions soon discovered that in the auctions that many of these purchasers who had brought this land in the auctions turned to be the servants and peasants of the rajas who had the land on behalf of their master. Over 95% of the sale at these auctions was actually fictitious. Only 5% are land, actually changed land. So 95% estates of the Raja of this Bardwan actually came back into his own hands. Okay, so but then why had the Raja failed to pay this revenue if he could buy back most of his property? Why at all do that? Who are the purchasers in these auctions? And what does the story tell us about what was happening in this rural area of this Eastern India at the time? So we had these mentions about this permanent settlement. A permanent settlement system was a land revenue system. So the first question is why the British East India Company had to introduce it, or what are the advantages of this permanent settlement? So in 1757, this Battle of Plassey had taken place, and Bengal had passed into the hands of this British company by then in the for about 15 years time. So that is why this in 1770s the rural economy in Bengal was in crisis. There was occurring famines and declining agriculture output. Officials felt that this agriculture trade and these revenue resources of the state could be developed by encouraging this investment in agriculture. Okay, now why these concerns? Because if agriculture produce is failing, the British revenue collections is failing as well. So in order to encourage this investment and agriculture, the company felt that this could be done by securing rights of property and permanently fixing the rates of this revenue demand. So they thought that if the revenue demand was this permanently fixed, the company could look for this regular flow of this revenue, and the zamindars on the other hand would feel short of this earning profits on this investment, since the state could not siphon it off by this increasing claims. So the agriculture crisis continued to rise, And the difference between these agricultures and this income and the tax would be paid would continue to increase, and this could be kept by these zamindars. So this the company was very confident that zamindars would therefore be motivated. They began to motivate the zamindars to invest in the land so that they improve their lands by using fertilizers, mechanizations, and they try to increase the agricultural outputs in that way. Okay, and because the third advantages here is that these zamindars would understand that their wealth completely dependent on the company, so they would remain loyal to the East India Company. But then this is a great story. Why is it the zamindars were defaulters on payment? Couples of reasons for this. Let's see first one. Firstly, these initial demands was extremely high since the company felt that they would not be increasing the revenue anytime so soon. In anticipations of this higher agriculture price, they decided to put the initial demands very high. Okay, and the second problem is that the expectations of the British company did not really come true, because there was a decline in agriculture price from the 1790s onward. So the riots could not sell their crops for a very high price, which means that they could not pay their dues. If they could not sell their crops, they could not pay their dues to the zamindars, isn't it? So which in turn the zamindars could not collect the revenue again, and they could not submit to the company. So that was it. And the third problem was the sunset laws. One of the clauses of this permanent settlement said if the dues were not paid by sunset of the pre-decided debts, no extensions of concession was to be given, even if the crops were failed for any peasants, and if there was non-payment of revenue on the said that the zamindar was liable to be auctions. Okay, and let's see the fourth problems. The fourth problem was that the company limited the power of the zamindars. So the permanent settlement limited the power of the zamindars. That truth was that these custom duties were abolished. Okay, and then appointed by this company, now zamindar had no way by this forcing the jotedars and the riots to pay, who often purposely are delay payments to get the jamindars in trouble. So the jamindars could file cases against these defaulters, and the judicial process was very long drawn. And by the time these zamindars of this Bardwan was being auctioned, there was already 30,000 cases which these zamindars had filed on various peasants and the jotedars. Okay, and now who are these jotedars? These jotedars were a group of prosperous farmers. These jotedars were a class of rich peasants. These jotedars acquired vast areas of land. They controlled trade, money lendings, and exercised immense power over the poor cultivators. Their land was cultivated through this sharecropper known as these adiyers, or these bagardars. Within the village, the power of this jotedar was more effective than that of these jamindars, okay, and prevented these zamindari officials from this executing their duties. And sometimes they also purchased the auctions property of these jamindars, and this jotedar plays an important role in weakening of this jamindari system. Okay, and next we go to the resistance of the zamindars. In order to prevent the weakening of their authority, zamindars took a series of steps like fictitious sales or these transferings of this property to female members of the family, and manipulated the auctions. Sometimes they with the help they held the revenue, they threatened or intimidatedly the people outside the zamindars if they try to vote and instead. Okay, and let's see the fifth report. The fifth report and its impacts on zamindars. It was this fifth report of a series of reports on these administrations and activities of the East India Company in India, and this report was submitted to the British Parliament in 1813. And this fifth report means that the British Parliament forced the company to produce regular report on the administrations of India and appointed a committee to inquire into the affairs of this company. Okay, and this fifth report was shaped the conceptions of what had happened in rural Bengals during that period, and evidence shows that this fifth report was very important during those period. Okay, and let's go to in the hills of Raj Mahal, the hoe and the plow. Let's see the accounts of Buchanan's. Francis Buchanan's undertook detailed surveys of the area of these Raj Mahal hills under the jurisdictions of this British East India Company. Buchanan's journey was sponsored by this company and it was planned according to its needs, and he observed the stone, rocks and these different layers of the soil, minerals and stones that were commercially valuable. Buchanan's, he wrote about this landscape, the landscapes of these Raj Mahal hills and how this landscape could be transformed and made productive. And his assessments were shaped by this commercial interests of this company and these modern Western nations of instituted progress. He was very critical about the lifestyles of the forest dweller. Okay, and then he tried to know every nook and corners of these forest dwellers. And let's go to these pastoral areas of Bengal. With the gradual paces of time, settled cultivators expanded and reached to the area of shifting cultivations, shallowing up this pasture and forest in these Raj Mahal hills. Okay, shifting cultivation was done with the help of this hoe, while settled cultivation was done through this plow. So, in the hills of this Raj Mahal, Francis Buchanan was a physician who traveled to Raj Mahal hills and he gave an account about it. And originally, this Paharia they lives in these Raj Mahal hills, okay, and they lived on this hunting, shifting, cultivations, food gathering, and they were intimately connected to these forests. Okay, and in the last decades of this 18th century, the British encouraged this forest clearance, and the zamindars and these jotedars also started to this uncultivated land into rice rice fields, and as settled agriculture expanded, the area under forests and pastures were contracted, and this sharp the conflicts between these Paharias and these settled cultivators. Okay, and in around 1780s, the Santals came into these areas. The Santals were the tribals. Okay, and then they cleared the forests and plowed the land. And so the lower hills of this Rajmahal were taken over by these Santal settlers, and the Paharias resided interior into these Rajmahal hills. Okay, and let's see then the Santals. Then the Santals became the settlers. Let's see here. These Zamindars and these Britishers, after having failed to subdue the Paharias and transform them into settled cultivators, they turn towards the Santals. So the Santals appeared to be idle settlers. They cleared the forest and plowed the land, and after that land grant, land was granted to them, and the populations of this Santal increased repeatedly, and their villages also increased in number when these Santals were settling. Okay? And the Paharia resisted and were ultimately forced to withdraw them deeper into these hills. This impoverished the Paharias to a great extent. Okay, so on the other hand, these Santal now lived in the settled life, and they cultivated a range of these commercial crops for markets, and they also deals with these traders, moneylenders, and make it easier. They are making an easier way of life. But the state, that is the British government, taxed them heavily. Moneylenders were charging high interest rate and taking over their land when debts remained unpaid, and these zamindars were asserting control over their lands. And later, due to problems, these Santals revolted against the British in the year between 1855 and 1856. And to specify them, these Britishers carved out new areas for the Santals and imposed some special laws within it. So their life was completely changed after the coming of the British. Okay. Okay, katizong ka, voina kan explain tur chu nia, chuan in homework tur chu, you chan your book 2, page 286, textual question 1 to 5 ka, in low by heart vek don nia. Oh, thank you all.